Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this narration of the web novel Burning Stars, Falling Skies, taken from both HFY and Royal Road. The link to the original will be down below, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. And if you do, please subscribe, like, and comment so that the great algorithm and all its wisdom decides to help grow this channel. Chapter 19. Vengeance. Threedak's attention snapped back to the plot as both sets of rockets drifted within range of the other's fleet's screening elements. The holograph flashed and the screening vessels did their best to penetrate the incoming rocket swarm's electronic countermeasures long range for their lasers to tag them. The rocket tally quickly ticked down as lasers blinded out or outright destroyed them. A breath later, they passed into a projectile range, and the fleet's drones swarmed into position, spitting hyper-accelerated clouds of dust at the rockets. Then, the first volley passed both screens, screaming electronic defiance at the target computers as they shifted back and forth, trying to give the defenders' lasers the most elusive profile possible. Katosh gritted her teeth on camera as the Empress Threedak jerked back and forth, its heavy thrusters tossing the DrakeBear around and their couches as the pre-programmed evasive maneuvers did their best to avoid the rocket swarm. The fleet's icons flickered as their point defenses activated. Lasers blinked life, invisible except when they were struck a rocket, superheating their armor just as they attempted to melt through and detonate their weapons before they could rotate or jet away. Countermeasures launched themselves across the fleet, heavy but inefficient engines letting them sprint across the void to annihilate themselves in a flash of nuclear fire, occasionally taking the enemy rocket with them. Threedak blinked, barely able to make sense of the tapestry of rockets weaving and dying, fed to the command center by the Empress Threedak's sensors. The dizzying display ended almost as soon as it began, the incredible relative speed of the enemy rockets plowing through the fleet's point defense envelope and into range of the last-ditch kinetic weapon systems in the blink of an eye. The rockets exploded, blanketing the William Driscoll, a torch ship chosen seemingly at random, the flashing in white light visible even from the Empress Threedak's bridge. The Driscoll managed to shake off almost half of the 40 remaining rockets and all of the fusion warheads. Still, 20 warheads exploded near enough to the twisting and weaving ship and into with X-ray lasers. Armor and external weapons melted off the Driscoll as it rocked, chunks of vessel disappearing in rapid expanding spheres of plasma. Even though the lasers themselves didn't have any appreciable kinetic force, explosions caused by their interaction with the ship's armor was more than enough to throw at least partially out of formation. Threedak held her breath, watching the ship's icon flicker as it labored under the invaders' body blows. Finally, the storm relented and Driscoll accelerated back to the formation, trailing a thin stream of metal gas. Next to her, Bakai sighed. Both reactors on the main cannon are still intact, her daughter whispered, almost to herself, as her eyes remained glued to the plot. It looks like that round was mostly superficial damage. And they're all right then, Dallas asked, wringing her graspers together. What? Bakai glanced over it back to Dallas, startled by realizing the others had heard her. Not really, Bakai continued grimly. The Driscoll made it through that volley with minimal damage, but that was at the expense of most of their armor. Both sides were fired 6 waves of rockets. If another one targets the Driscoll, it's in trouble. If 2 target it... Bakai shrugged as her tail flicked against the ground. All it takes is a lucky shot to a coolant regulator on a reactor or an engine that an entire ship has gone. If you don't hit something vital with a laser, torch ships can take a lot of beating, but with a number of warheads getting thrown around, it's only a matter of time before they do hit something vital. Well, it's either that or the lasers pick off enough close-in weapon systems and maneuvering thrusters to drop a couple fusion warheads on it. That'll end things real fast. On the plot, one of the invaded torch ships shuddered, glowing noticeably as the icons of DrakeBear rockets flickered around it. A flashing icon appeared next to the ship's red triangle, indicating both that its heat signature had diminished and that it was streaming oxygen. Threedak hissed. That meant that their armor was breached and there was one reactor was down. It was a harsh carcass, but as badly as the Driscoll was damaged, it savaged the enemy in exchange. The battle raged on. Screens built up to dangerous levels with heat as they did their best to intercept incoming waves of rockets, firing their lasers with abandon in an attempt to spare the rest of the fleet from the tides of nuclear fire washing towards it. Still, casualties mounted. The Driscoll dropped out of formation, accelerating perpendicular to the vectors of the two fleets, attacking each other. Notifications next to the icons indicating that over 100 DrakeBear had died. When laser pulses had superheated the command situation in the gunnery deck and a full Marine company's living quarters. Another torch ship, the Wang Zhenyu, suffered a similar fate. After 2 volleys of rockets, including 1 strike from the fusion warhead, its armor was about as useful as wet paper, forcing it to limp away as well. Its acceleration curbed by laser strike and took out the regulator on one of its 2 fusion reactors, making it unsafe to operate. The second vessel fared worse. The first volley easily overwhelmed the invaders' point defenses before it tore into the torch ship, melting almost all of its armor off and likely disabling its main cannon. The follow-up rocket finished the kill of X-rays from the laser warheads, strove through almost non-existent armor, disabling systems and ripping through internal structure supports. Then 2 fusion warheads went off, one after another, a mere 100 meters from the torch ships. Energy and radiation bathed the vessel, and when the flash faded, all that remained was a twisted and glowing hulk of metal. The final 2 volleys were especially brutal as the screens struggled to get into position, many only firing off a couple heated laser shots and did little more than heat up a couple armor panels on extreme range. The smaller vessels would need time to run their radiators before they could contribute to the battle. Already, their coolant reserves had run dry as they used everything on hand to keep their frantic pace of the conflict. Without Screen's help, the Franklin Mitchell was powdered by rocket after rocket. In places, space could be seen through the holes bored into it by invaders' X-rays. Somehow, despite almost 60 hits, streaming air and floating dead in space, the vessel lived. It subsisted on an emergency power, reporting that its main gunners' both reactors were disabled. The acting captain, from a bridge open to vacuum, a great hole through the section where the captain should have sat, stated hoarsely that she had hoped that they would be able to bring 1 reactor online and limp home. On the invader side, the third vessel was simply erased from existence. Over 100 rockets detonated around it in the first wave, riddling it with holes and letting the fusion warhead sneak near enough to melt the front third of the ship. The second volley couldn't be reprogrammed at range, something proposed by a human admiral that had thought himself clever, until the invaders simply turned off all of his rockets and promptly killed him. Instead, it plowed into the shredded mass of injured vessels uncontested. The invaders didn't even bother wasting resources and couldn't protect the hulk. 15 fusion warheads detonated at point-blank range, rendering the 150 or so laser pulses moot. The ship disintegrated. The component pieces practically glowed with heat and radiation. Drida turned her head as Bakai thrummed unhappily. "We have to do better, Mother," Bakai muttered grumbly, her neck pouches splitting and emptying as she tried to keep her anger in check. "We fired almost twice as many rockets and had almost twice the weight of defensive fire. We only landed about 40% more hits. We should have hit them 2 or 3 more times often than they hit us. I don't know if it's a question of equipment or technology proficiency with equipment. Those aren't numbers of someone who plans on winning a war. And he's someone who plans on winning a war without massive numerical advantage." Bakai shrugged, her muzzle still set in the pensive grimace. "Given the invaders' inability to resupply," Dallas interjected quietly, her whisper, a voice carrying across the entirety of the almost silent command center. "They likely don't breed at the same rate as us. If all else fails, so long as we're given time, we will have the numerical superiority we need. Burying them in bodies might not be the most glamorous of victories, but if it'll keep our daughters safe, we will do what we must." "Well said," Thredak nodded to Dallas, warmth running through her. "The stars are our birthright, and if we must walk through the sea of flames to claim it, so be. I would prefer the DrakeBear to lead peaceful lives, like the humans, but that simply isn't the way of things." "Mother," McGee motioned with her head towards the plot of the two opposing screens accelerating towards each other. Seconds later, the heavy guns on both fleets opened up. Thridak's muzzle spread into a predatory grin as the 4 cannons on her namesake supplemented the single weapon on the 3 active torch ships. That was why Katash had held off against the enemy station, to prevent the invaders from seeing the massive close-range firepower mounted on the Empress Thridak, in the hope that it would be able to avoid enemy fire long enough to close range. The invaders' return fire only amounted to 2 cannons, crippled to the point of borderline uselessness. Technically, at close range it still could use minimal lasers and close-in weapon systems to harm another ship, but the chances of anything approaching that range were minuscule. In short, the Empress Thridak mounted twice as many long-range cannons as the entirety of the invading force. The shells raced past the respective screens as they pushed their engines to get within a knife distance to use their unguided railguns. At the last second, the shells scattered into flechettes, showering the dodging invader ships with slivers of heavy metal. The bridge of the Empress Thridak shuddered slightly as the ship shrugged off a handful of penetrators, but the invaders weren't so lucky. Whenever the Dodgetal's weakness in rockets combat, it didn't extend to electromagnetic cannons. One of the 2 invader ships erupted in a flash of light as the flechettes peppering its surface shattered the armor and containment housing of the fusion torch. For a brief second, the cage sun was on the ship's engine was exposed to the void of space, and then the magnetic bottle shielding it evaporated, taking the rest of the ship with it. The other ship weathered the storm of metal, limping out of the other side of the streaming oxygen and debris as its power and heat levels fluctuated noticeably. The second volley hit, effectively ending the battle. Once again, the Empress Thridak took some glancing blows without any casualties, but the invaders couldn't stay the same. Mixed in with a stream of flechette shells, Katash included some penetrators, and at least one hit the invaded torch ship as it struggled to avoid the Dodgetal fire with its weakened engines. The multiple-kilogram ship killer took its upper third of the cylindrical form with the force and a subtlety of a freight train. The slug entered through a hole the size of a small sedan, and exited in a plume of plasma that simply ruptured the side of the torch ship. The shot took down the ship's struggling electrical systems, and, without thrusters to counter the force of the blow, the ship spun on its axis like a top. Then the flechettes hit, riddling with the ready disabled hulk of metal. It floated in space, aimless and crippled, for full 5 seconds before a third volley. 4 precisely aimed-shot penetrator rounds from the Empress Thridak struck it, shattering the keel and reducing the ship to little more than scrap. Cheering erupted around the command center, eliciting a frown from Thridak. Although the battle was decided, the invaders fought on, their screens and drones struggling to close range against the Dodgetal counterparts. Even as the analysis of the warriors in the Meridian Station cracked open bottles of fizzy fermented drinks, Dodgetal bled and died furtively against those foes. Their ships too close to the torch ships to intervene, and their velocities too high to avoid the enemy. Quietly, Darlas made to leave. She'd never been one for celebrations, and clearly she didn't want to be caught up in this one. Thridak shook her head and raised a grasper to stop her daughter. The battle isn't over. She nodded at the plot where both green and red squares flickered and disappeared. They are still dying for us. The least that we can do is stand by and watch their sacrifice. End of chapter. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you enjoyed the story, please follow the link down below and let the author know. If you wish to support this channel, you can do all the usual YouTube gumph, like subscribing, following, and more importantly, sharing. All of these things do help the channel grow. If you wish to do more, there are links for donations, Patreon, and channel memberships as well. And until the next time, I hope that you all have a wonderful one. I will see you in the next video. Cheers.